Today, air travel is a fairly mundane story. It's not a bus ride, of course, but it's also a prosaic thing. But this was not always the case. In the early days of aviation, the possibility of flying was admired not only by passengers, but also by the airlines. They felt like the bearers of a great dream, the vanguard of technological progress, and they really were the vanguard. In the history of American civil aviation, there is no airline more influential and famous than Pan American World Airways, or Pan Am for short. It was not the first or the most popular airline in the country, but it has always been a symbol of the prosperous America of the 20th century. Suffice it to say that in Kubrick's Space Odyssey, Pan Am carries passengers to other planets. Today, we are going to talk about the Pan American brand and why it is no longer with us. Pan American Airways was founded in early 1927 by American military pilots for a very specific reason. The Americans did not like the growing influence of the German airline in Central America. Initially, Pan Am was to carry mail on the Key West, Florida, Havana route. At the same time, a young businessman from an old American family named Juan Terry Tripp had the idea of creating an airline capable of providing the best service to rich passengers. He couldn't have done it alone, but fortunately, he had classmates at Yale named Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, and Harriman. These three wonderful people invested $250,000 in Tripp's idea, and in the summer of 1927, he founded the Aviation Corporation of America. Soon, the first mail plane made its maiden flight from Florida to Havana. But it was not a success. Success came when a new law on foreign airmail was passed in 1928, according to which only those airlines invited by local governments received the right to operate in Latin America. In other words, not all Germans. This was the first time that Juan Tripp's extraordinary diplomatic skills were put to the test. He went on a tour of the continent, communicating everywhere with the responsible officials, not forgetting to hand out gifts and promises. This was not the end of the matter. Tripp thought of inviting the famous aviator Charles Lindbergh to be a technical advisor and to take part in the negotiations. Lindbergh had just completed his first solo flight across the Atlantic, had become a sensation, and was adored by the press. The merger took place that same year. Pan American gave the new formation its name, military pilots and special relations with the state, which in fact gave it a large number of coveted routes in Latin America: Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Bahamas, Mexico, and Chile. Tripp provided the rest, including management. In 1929, the airline made its first passenger flight from Miami to San Juan via Belize and Managua. The 3,200-kilometer trip took 56 hours, including 2 overnight stops. The 1930s saw Pan Am grow rapidly. It became a pioneer in many areas: the use of seaplanes, flights across the Pacific Ocean, and the organization of regular commercial flights across the North Atlantic. By the way, the famous Russian aircraft designer Igor Sikorsky created flying boats for Pan American. He designed 2 aircraft, the S-40 and S-42, the first 4-engine seaplanes in history. The first S-40 was named the American Clipper, after the high-speed sailboats of the 19th century. A tradition was established. Every Pan Am aircraft has been named a Clipper ever since. In October 1936, Pan Am inaugurated the first transoceanic passenger flights. Only the very rich could afford them. A round-trip ticket from San Francisco to Manila cost $1,400, a lot of money at the time. By this time, Pan American's fleet of seaplanes was so famous that it was immortalized by Hollywood in the 1936 film China Clipper, starring Humphrey Bogart. In 1939, flights from San Francisco to Hong Kong were introduced in 6 days with stopovers. The route was served by new long-range seaplanes specially designed by Boeing. The first was named the Honolulu Clipper. In 1943, Franklin Roosevelt flew on a Pan Am Boeing to Casablanca for the legendary conference with Churchill and de Gaulle. On the way back, Roosevelt celebrated his 61st birthday on board with a lunch of, as the newspapers put it, caviar, olives, celery, pickles, turkey, green peas, cake, and champagne. After the war, the situation changed. Pan Am's de facto monopoly on international transportation was taken away. The company had to adapt to the new reality. It was possible to increase the number of long-distance routes, but such flights remained expensive and inaccessible to many people. And then Tripp came up with the idea of dividing the plane into classes, as had long been done on cruise ships. In 1948, Pan Am became the first international airline to introduce economy class. The seats were cramped, the service was inferior, but the ticket cost 1.5 times less because more passengers could fit on the plane. The conditions for rich customers were still luxurious. For example, they could have not only a full bed, but breakfast in bed, brought by the flight attendant. Pan Am continued to prosper. In 1960, the company decided to build its own terminal at New York's JFK Airport and its own headquarters in Manhattan. The terminal was called Worldport, and it was astonishing. In the spirit of the times, it was built in the shape of a flying saucer. But the skyscraper was even more magnificent. It has 58 floors and is still one of the 100 tallest buildings in the United States. It was based on Le Corbusier's unrealized project for Algeria, with the giant letters Pan Am on the facade. There was another story about those letters later. In 1981, the building was sold for $400 million. The new owner calculated how much it would cost to dismantle the logo, and as a result, he lived with someone else's logo on the facade for another 10 years because it turned out that dismantling the letters would cost $3 million. One can only wonder how much it would have cost to install them. That's the whole point of Pan Am. It wasn't just necessary to take first place, it was also necessary for everyone to see it. And Pan Am really took the first place, mainly due to its flair for new ideas and breakthrough technologies. For example, this is the first airline in history to evaluate the advantages of long-haul aircraft capable of flying thousands of kilometers without landing. Pan Am continued its successful cooperation with Boeing and in 1949 became the first customer of the Boeing 777 Stratocruiser aircraft, at that time the largest, fastest, and most comfortable airliner in the world. The 1950s ushered in the era of jetliners, and in 1958, the 4-engine Boeing 707 Clipper America became the first American jetliner to make a scheduled passenger flight. In 1961, Pan Am announced a partnership with IBM to create an innovative electronic reservation system. At the time, only the Pentagon had anything like it. The system was created, became revolutionary, was fast and versatile, and was soon used not only for reservations, but also for other services: accounting, sales analysis, air traffic management, and digital flight tracking. It was Tripp who ordered the legendary 747 from Boeing-100 at a time. With the 747s, Pan Am began to set world records, flying to Japan and Australia. By the end of the 1970s, the company was flying to every continent except Antarctica. Flights to the USSR were a separate line. trip began the first negotiations on air service with the Soviet Union back in the 1930s, but then they broke down for political reasons. Then the World War broke out, then the Cold War began, and only in the late 1950s did they return to the topic. After many years of difficult discussions at the leadership level of the two countries, a result has finally been achieved. On July 15, 1968, a Pan Am Boeing 707 flew from New York to Moscow Sheremetyevo Airport. On the same day, an Aeroflot EL-62 made a mirror flight en route Moscow, New York. Until 1979, when flights were discontinued due to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, Pan American remained the only American airline with direct flights to the USSR. There are two funny facts in this story. Firstly, Aeroflot tickets were cheaper. The Soviet country needed foreign currency, and Aeroflot was seriously dumping. Accordingly, Pan Am planes flew half empty, and Soviet flights were always packed. Secondly, the American company was prohibited from selling tickets to Soviet citizens. Despite this, she had an official representative office in the building of the Metropole Hotel. It had the right to distribute promotional products. Colorful Pan Am wall calendars were highly appreciated by the people. In general, Pan Am has always been good at marketing. The blue globe logo the company has used since the 1950s is one of the most recognizable symbols in aviation history. Pan Am ads were everywhere, celebrating the luxury and glamour of air travel. In 1956, Pan Am hired Hemingway as an ambassador, often flying to Cuba. He is credited with suggesting the laconic slogan, "World's Most Experienced Airline," to Pan Am advertisers. Numerous celebrities, from the President of the United States to Hollywood stars, were photographed with souvenir bags from first class. One of the most significant events in music history also occurred with Pan American's participation. On February 7, 1964, the Beatles arrived on Flight 101 from London for their first tour of the United States. This was the beginning of the so-called British invasion of America. It is noteworthy that Pan Am did not limit itself to the role of a simple airline, but provided the musicians with an exclusive escort from Heathrow to the first press conference at JFK Airport. Numerous photos of the Beatles with the Pan Am logo in the background flew around the world. It was simply impossible to come up with a better advertisement at that time. Pan Am was not the first airline to engage in movie product placement, but it was one of the most active. In addition to the aforementioned Space Odyssey, its logo has appeared in films about James Bond, Indiana Jones, Blade Runner, Scarface, and even Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. In the 1970s, it was the most important airline in the United States, the most famous, the most technologically advanced, and the most respectable. Pan Am had real plans to conquer the global airline market. And that begs the question, what went wrong? Why did Pan Am go bankrupt? There are several reasons. The first and most important is the 1973 oil crisis. The crisis caused fuel prices to skyrocket, and Pan Am was hit the hardest because it used large, long-range Boeing 747s that drank kerosene like water. The second reason is that the laws changed again, and Pan Am lost government support. There was less money, it had to be counted, and it turned out that the company had a huge number of unnecessary and unprofitable assets: regional airlines, real estate, aging aircraft, unprofitable destinations, and a bunch of representative offices in different countries. Losses by the end of the 1970s exceeded $1 billion. Juan Trippe, who had successfully led Pan Am for 4 decades, died in 1981. Finally, the airline's reputation was severely damaged by a terrorist attack. Muammar Gaddafi's men blew up a Boeing 747 over the small Scottish town of Lockerbie, killing 270 people. The final nail in Pan American's coffin was Iraq's 1990 invasion of Kuwait and the Gulf War. Not only did fuel prices spike again, but global demand for air travel plummeted. Profitable routes, including Pan Am's key transatlantic routes, became sharply unprofitable. The company filed for bankruptcy in 1991, and on December 4th of that year, the last Pan Am flight left Barbados for Miami. It was symbolic, considering that the company had started in that region 64 years earlier. At the airport, the plane was greeted with a traditional water salute from fire trucks, and hundreds of Pan American employees came to say goodbye. Many people were in tears. Thus ended the story of America's most brilliant airline, and with it, the romantic era of passenger aviation. Thank you for being with us until the end. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any interesting new releases. Your comments are very important to us. Share your thoughts below. See you in the next videos.